"I'm afraid," the estate attorney said, his gaze fixed on the files my father had slammed onto the mahogany desk, "that this filing is legally impossible." My father, Victor Thorne, leaned back with a smug, predatory grin. "Read it again," he commanded, as if he were ordering dinner at a private club. 18 years had crawled by since he disowned me at age 13, dumping me at the iron gates of Aunt Beatrice's remote estate with nothing but a duffel bag. 18 years of hearing the world describe me as a volatile and ungrateful child who was too difficult for any sane parent to handle. Now he stood in Beatrice's study, clad in an Italian silk suit, tapping his manicured nails against the desk with the rhythmic arrogance of a man who assumed the world owed him everything. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade, but as I walked into the room, he didn't even look up, simply sneering, "You're late, Elena, still craving attention, aren't you?" The relatives huddled against the walls went deadly silent. I slowly took off my trench coat and sat directly across from him. Mr. Sterling, Beatrice's attorney, reached for the lock on the heavy study door. That was the moment Victor's smile faltered. The room was heavy with the scent of pipe tobacco, aged leather, and expensive lilies. Aunt Beatrice would have detested the scene. She despised performative grief and loathed men who entered a home expecting the women to shrink to accommodate them. But my father adored environments like this. He stood at the head of the table, flanked by my stepmother, Diane, as if the distribution of Beatrice's vast estate were a board meeting he had summoned. My cousins stared at their shoes, avoiding my eyes. An uncle I barely recognized leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I didn't know Elena would dare to show up." Victor caught the remark and let out a dry, chilling laugh. "Of course she came," he said. "Beatrice always loved drama." I kept my hands folded, steady. Mr. Sterling glanced at me, then at the cream-colored, wax-sealed envelope before him. It was addressed in Beatrice's distinct, looping handwriting. Beside it lay a second, darker folder. Thorne Original Ledger. Victor noticed my gaze. "That woman poisoned your mind," he spat, gesturing vaguely to where Beatrice had spent her final years. "Don't pretend she was your mother. She was my estranged sister-in-law before she decided to play guardian." Diane reached out to touch his sleeve. "Victor, please." "No," he barked. "Everyone here knows the truth. Elena was cast out because she turned our home into a battlefield. Beatrice took her in because she had a savior complex for broken things." A few guests looked at the floor in shame. I looked at Mr. Sterling. His face was ghostly pale. Victor pointed at the papers. "Enough. Family assets belong to family." "What did she leave me?" I leaned forward, my voice cool and sharp. "You should sit down before you humiliate yourself." Victor's eyes hardened. "You don't silence me in my own family's house." "This stopped being your house," I said, "the night you dropped me at those gates." He took a menacing step toward me. Before he could retort, Mr. Sterling stood, engaged the lock on the study door, and said, "No one leaves until I address why Mr. Thorne's claims are fraudulent." The click of that lock echoed, pulling me back 18 years. I was 13, shivering in the fog outside Beatrice's gates, clutching my school backpack while my father idled in his luxury sedan, refusing to even kill the engine. My stepmother stood beside me, perfectly dry under her umbrella, acting as if she were returning a defective purchase. "Mom," I had pleaded, "what did I do?" She wouldn't even meet my gaze. "Your aunt wanted responsibility," she'd said. "Now she can have it." I had asked one final question. Victor had rolled down the window just an inch. "You meddled in private ledgers that weren't yours," he had replied. "Children who spy don't get protection." Beatrice's door had opened then. She stood there in a silk robe, barefoot, looking from my shivering frame to my parents. "Diane," she had whispered, "why does Elena have all her records packed?" Beatrice didn't answer. She just stepped into the rain and took my bag, which was stuffed with my birth certificate and my grandmother's bank statements, all showing a balance of 0. That night, Beatrice made me tea and promised I didn't have to leave, but I overheard her whispering into a phone in the hallway after midnight. "Victor, you don't discard a child because she found a discrepancy in a ledger." Victor's voice came through, cold and sharp. "Stay out of my books, Beatrice, unless you want your own history examined." The hallway went silent. When Beatrice returned, she didn't look angry. She looked terrified. It is a chilling thing to realize that justice is often delayed, but it never forgets. This is why we created Karma Tales. We believe that every secret, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to the surface. If you are captivated by real-life stories where the truth dismantles the lies of the powerful, you belong in our community. Hit that subscribe button now. Join us as we explore these powerful narratives regularly. You don't want to miss the next time the scales of justice balance out. I kept thinking about that phone call for years. I started saving everything: emails, stray notes, bank notices. When I finally asked Beatrice what my father held over her, she simply said, "Some truths require proof before they can be told." I believed her, right up until the night I found her weeping in the study, burning old loan notices in the fireplace. I saw my father's signature on the bottom of a burning page. Back in the study, Victor's composure shattered. "Unlock that door," he demanded. Mr. Sterling stood firm. "This is not a standard will reading, Victor. The codicil you provided creates a legal crisis I cannot ignore." Victor scoffed. "Slander. Be careful or I'll see you." Mr. Sterling opened the folder. "Beatrice's official will was stored here years ago. It is verified and notarized. Nothing is unclear." "Then read it," Victor snapped. "I was prepared to," Mr. Sterling replied, "until you arrived with a new amendment this morning." A codicil is an amendment, and this one claimed Beatrice had granted Victor direct access to her private archives. "No," I interjected, meeting their eyes. "I remember Beatrice's final weeks. She was comatose for a month. She couldn't have signed anything." Victor turned on me. "You weren't there. You don't know." "I was the only one allowed in the room," I said. Mr. Sterling slid the envelope across the table. "Elena, Beatrice left this for you." Inside was a brass key, a list of account numbers, and one sentence: "When he comes for the records, force him to ask in front of witnesses." My pulse spiked. I placed my phone on the desk and hit record. Victor saw the screen light up. "You pathetic girl," he hissed. "She poisoned you against your real family." "He destroyed himself," I said to the room, "when he forged a dead woman's signature." Mr. Sterling's assistant stood between Victor and the table, clutching the files. "Mr. Thorne, I have already notified the probate court. This amendment matches irregularities in the financial records Beatrice spent years securing." I held up the brass key. "I know exactly what this opens." Mr. Sterling led us to the private archive in the study. I unlocked the safe. Inside were labeled binders and a letter in Beatrice's handwriting. The first binder was marked, "Elena's grandmother's savings records." The second, "Victor Thorne loan guarantees." The third, "Threats and correspondence." My father stood behind me, his breathing ragged. "Those are private," he rasped. Mr. Sterling looked at him over his spectacles. "Not anymore." The truth emerged, page by agonizing page. My grandmother had left me a fund for my education. Victor had drained it to cover a failed business venture. Then he had used Beatrice's name as a guarantor on the loan, forging her signature on every page. When I found the empty account as a child, he cut me off to ensure I couldn't verify his theft. Diane sank into her chair, gasping. "Victor, tell them it's not true." He was silent. Mr. Sterling read the final note Beatrice had left. Victor threatened to destroy me if I exposed the loan fraud. I chose to gather records until the truth could survive him. The forged codicil didn't just ask for money. It was a desperate grab for the very evidence that would send him to prison. I turned to him. For 18 years, he had lived in my mind as an unreachable giant, the man in the driver's seat. But standing there, surrounded by his own exposed lies, he looked small. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single, scorched page I had saved years ago. I slid it across the table. "I kept this one too." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Mr. Sterling closed the file. "Beatrice's will leaves Victor and Diane Thorne nothing. Elena Thorne inherits the estate, all shares, and full authority over the foundation." Security entered the room before he could protest. As they escorted him out, the papers from his folder fluttered to the floor like autumn leaves. By the end of the week, the truth had traveled to every corner of our social circle. His partners withdrew, the probate court launched a full investigation, and the old fraud he'd buried under my childhood was finally coming to light. Diane tried to corner me in the hallway later. "I was scared," she whimpered. "I did what he told me." I looked at the woman who had held the umbrella while I stood in the rain. "Fear explains silence, Diane. It doesn't erase 18 years of letting the world call me unstable to protect a thief." I walked away, and I never let them close enough to touch me again. Months later, I reopened the estate as the headquarters for a youth scholarship fund. The first award went to a 13-year-old girl escaping a toxic home. I framed Beatrice's envelope behind my desk. It wasn't a mark of pain anymore, it was proof. The truth can wait patiently for years, and yet arrive at exactly the right moment. The night my parents threw me away, they thought they were burying me. 18 years later,